When a woman spends 11 years cleaning hotel rooms, she learns one thing above everything else. You do the job with your whole heart, every single day. No shortcuts, no cutting corners, no excuses. Celestine Mayweather lived by that rule. She woke up every morning at 4:47. She put on her uniform. She pushed her cart down those long hotel hallways, and she took care of every room like her name was written on every surface she touched. Because in her mind, it was. For 11 years, nobody had a single complaint about Celestine. Not one. She was the kind of woman who noticed things. If a guest looked cold, she found them a blanket. If someone couldn't understand a form, she helped them. If a room needed a little extra care, she gave it. Not because anyone told her to, but because that was just who she was. And then one Tuesday morning in October, she walked into room 1612. The guest staying there was Michael Jordan. He had already left for the day. The room was empty and quiet. Celestine did what she always did. She cleaned every surface, made the bed with perfect corners, replaced the little bottles of shampoo, vacuumed the carpet until it looked brand new. Then she walked into the bathroom, and she noticed something. The towel rack had 2 towels on it, just like the rules said. But looking at that rack, thinking about the long day the guest had ahead of him, thinking about what it would feel like to come back tired and find only 2 towels, she reached into her cart. She pulled out 1 extra towel. She folded it in that careful tri-fold she had done 10,000 times before. She placed it gently on the rack next to the others. In 1 extra towel. That was all. She pushed her cart to the next room and thought nothing more of it. But somewhere down in the hotel's basement office, her supervisor had been watching the hallway cameras all morning. He had seen everything. And by the time Celestine was halfway through her shift, he was already standing in the hallway with his clipboard, waiting for her. He told her that giving a guest an extra towel broke hotel policy. He told her it was her 3rd violation this quarter. And then he told her she was fired. 11 years. Gone. Over 1 extra towel left for a man who was coming back tired after a long day. Celestine walked to her car in that dim, cold parking garage. She sat behind the wheel, and for the first time in a very long time, she let herself cry. She drove home. She sat at her kitchen table. She looked at the numbers in her notebook, her savings, her rent, her car payment, and she felt the full weight of what had just happened pressed down on her chest like something she couldn't lift alone. She went to bed that night, not knowing what was coming next. She had no idea that across the city, in a hotel room on the 16th floor, a very tall man in a gray robe had just walked into a bathroom, looked at a towel rack, and stopped completely still. She had no idea that he had picked up the phone. She had no idea that by 1 o'clock in the morning, 3 phone calls had been made on her behalf, to people with the power to change everything. And she had absolutely no idea that the very next morning, before she had even finished her coffee, there would be a knock at her front door that would turn her entire life upside down. And what happened when she opened that door is something she will never forget for as long as she lives. And neither will you. Watch this video all the way to the end, because what Michael Jordan did next and what Celestine found inside that envelope on her own front doorstep is one of the most powerful things you're going to hear today. The alarm went off at 4:47 in the morning, not 5 o'clock, not 4:30, always 4:47. Celestine Mayweather had said it that way for so many years she could no longer remember why she had chosen that number. All she knew was that 4:47 was hers. It belonged to her the way very few things in her life did. She did not groan when it rang. She did not pull the blanket over her head like she used to do when she was young, and the world felt soft enough to let her waste a few minutes inside it. Instead, she sat up straight, swung both feet onto the cold hardwood floor, and took one slow, even breath. In through the nose, out through the mouth. Her knees ached. They always ache now, the way old wood creaks before a storm. Her lower back had been speaking to her in its own private language of sharp little complaints for the past 4 years. A word here, a word there, nothing she couldn't manage, but enough to remind her every morning that the body keeps a careful record of everything you ask it to do. She got up anyway. She always got up. Celestine Mayweather lived on the 2nd floor of a 6-unit building on Ridgewood Avenue in Charlotte, North Carolina. The building was old and the walls were thin, and she could hear Mr. Beaumont in the apartment above hers doing his early morning pacing. Back and forth, back and forth, the slow and careful shuffle of a man in his 80s who could not sleep past 4. She had never spoken to Mr. Beaumont about his pacing. It was not her business, but she had come over the years to find it strangely comforting, like a heartbeat in the ceiling, proof that she was not the only one awake in the dark. The kitchen smelled like coffee. She had set it on a timer the night before, the way she always did, so that when she got up, one good thing was already waiting for her. A small kindness she gave herself. She poured it into a dented silver travel mug that Tamara had given her 6 years ago, and that she refused to replace even though the lid no longer sealed quite right. Above the kitchen sink, taped to the cabinet door with a strip of old masking tape, was a photograph. Tamara, age 7. Standing at the edge of Lake Norman on a summer afternoon, holding up a small fish with both hands like it was made of gold. She was gap-toothed and laughing. The sun was behind her. She was squinting into it and laughing anyway. Celestine looked at the photo the way she looked at it every morning. Not long, just a glance. The way you touch something you love to make sure it is still there. Tamara was 29 now. She lived in Atlanta. She called every Sunday at 7 p.m. without fail, and they talked for at least an hour about everything and about nothing. She was a nurse. She was good at her job. She had her mother's hands. Wide palms, strong fingers, the kind of hands that knew how to take care of things. She was the reason Celestine got up at 4:47 every morning. She was the reason Celestine did everything. The uniform was dark blue pants and a white collared shirt. Celestine put it on the same way she always did. Pants first, then shirt, then the small silver stud earrings that had belonged to her mother. Then a look in the bathroom mirror that was not vanity, but inventory. She was checking herself the way a soldier checks their gear. Everything in order. Ready. On the left chest of the shirt was a stitched patch, oval-shaped, with the words, "The Grand Alderton Hotel." Housekeeping. She had worn that patch for 11 years. She knew every hallway on every floor of the Grand Alderton. She knew which elevator groaned when it went up and which one rattled when it came down. She knew which linens felt stiff after a Monday wash and which ones came out soft. Heck, she knew which guests left their rooms like a storm had passed through and which ones made the bed themselves before checkout, as if they were ashamed to leave a mess for someone else. She had cleaned rooms for a governor, a famous singer whose name she would never say out loud, 3 professional athletes, and once, a very old woman who left a handwritten thank you note on the pillow and $20 folded inside a piece of hotel stationery. That note was still in her nightstand drawer. 11 years taught you things. It taught you that a room is never just a room. It is a record of a person. The way they leave a place tells you who they are when no one is looking. Celestine believed in leaving things better than she found them. That was not a philosophy she had read in a book. It was just the rules she lived by. In the way some people live by rules they never had to be taught because they came built in, like a compass that always finds north. She locked her apartment door. She walked to her car in the dark. The October air was cold and clean and smelled faintly of wood smoke from somewhere down the block. She did not know as she started the engine and backed out of the parking space that this was the last morning she would make this drive as an employee of the Grand Alderton Hotel. She did not know that in a few hours, a single act of quiet kindness, one extra towel placed on a bathroom rack, would cost her everything she had spent 11 years building. And she did not know that the very next morning, something would happen at her front door that would change the entire shape of her life. But she was not the kind of woman who needed to know what was coming. She just drove toward it. Gerald Pruitt had a clipboard. He always had a clipboard. It was dark blue, the same color as the staff uniforms, as if he had chosen it on purpose so that the thing felt like part of the official machine. He carried it tucked under his left arm when he walked the floors, swinging his right hand freely at his side, and he held it up in front of him like a shield whenever he had something unpleasant to say. The clipboard did not protect him. It just gave his hands somewhere to be. Celestine was in room 1408 when she heard the knock at the open door. She was stripping the bed, pulling the fitted sheet free from the corner of the mattress, rolling the whole bundle into a tight ball the way she had done thousands of times. A motion so practiced it happened in her hands without asking her brain for permission. She heard the knock. She looked up. Gerald Pruitt stood in the doorway with his clipboard and his thin, careful frown. The frown was practiced too. She had noticed that about him over the years. Everything about Gerald was practiced, even his silences. "Celestine," he said, "when you have a moment." She knew by his tone. She had heard that particular arrangement of sounds before. Quiet, polite, stripped of anything warm. It was the tone of a man who had already made a decision and was now simply announcing it. She finished rolling the sheet. She always finished what she was doing. She set the bundle on the cart in the hallway, pulled the door to 1408 shut behind her, and turned to face him. I reviewed this morning's footage from floor 16, Gerald began. He looked at the clipboard rather than at her. "Room 1612. You placed a third bath towel on the rack." "I did," Celestine said. Her voice was level. She was not going to pretend otherwise. The guest had used everything he was given. "He's coming back this afternoon after a long day. I thought it was the right thing to do." "The right thing," Gerald repeated, as if the phrase were in a foreign language he did not speak. He looked up from the clipboard for the first time. "The policy is 2 bath towels per room, Celestine. No exceptions without prior manager approval. You have been here 11 years. You know this." "I do," she said. "Then you understand that this is not your first violation this quarter." He looked back down. "In August, you used hotel stationery to write a personal note for a guest who was struggling with her English. That is outside your role. You are not a concierge. You are not a translator. That was a written warning." Celestine pressed her lips together, but said nothing. "In September," Gerald continued, his voice carrying the practiced flatness of someone reading a court document, "you removed a rollaway blanket from the second-floor linen storage and gave it to a child in the lobby without checking it through inventory. That blanket was not logged. That was a second written warning." "That little girl was shivering," Celestine said quietly. Gerald looked at her. "That is not the point." "It was the point to her," Celestine said. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. The words sat in the air between them with their own weight, and Gerald held her gaze for exactly 1 second. Then he looked back at the clipboard. "You have received 2 written warnings. This third incident triggers our 3-strike policy." He cleared his throat, a small, dry sound like paper tearing. "I'm letting you go, Celestine. Today will be your last day. Your final paycheck will be ready by Thursday." The hallway was very quiet. Celestine stood in it and let the words settle around her like sediment in still water. She looked at Gerald Pruitt, at the clipboard, at the practiced frown, at the man who had just filed 3 acts of human kindness into the official record and labeled them violations. A note for a woman who could not read a form, a blanket for a cold child, a towel for a tired man. She had been written up for each one. She did not cry. She would not cry here. And in this hallway, in front of this man with his clipboard. Her mother had given her a set of instructions for moments like this one, delivered across a kitchen table in Tupelo Crossing, Mississippi, when Celestine was 14 years old and had just been treated unfairly for the first time in a way she could name. Chin up, eyes steady, back straight. Let them see who you are. Do not give them the satisfaction of anything less. She lifted her chin. She looked at Gerald directly. "I understand," she said. Then she walked to the break room in the basement. She moved through the familiar dim hallway, past the supply closet where the extra pillowcases lived, past the corkboard with the shift schedule pinned to it, past the microwave that always smelled like someone else's soup. She did all of this without rushing. From her locker, she took her crocheted bag, her dented travel mug, and the photograph of Tamara that she kept taped inside the door. The one from the lake, age 7, gap-toothed and laughing with the fish. She peeled the tape away from the metal very gently, pressed the photo flat against her chest, slid it into her bag. She did not say goodbye to anyone. Her co-workers were all on their floors. She was glad. She could not have kept her face together through goodbyes. She walked out through the service exit and into the parking garage. She sat in her car for a long time. The garage was dim and smelled like exhaust and cold concrete, and she sat in the middle of it and held the steering wheel with both hands and let out a breath so long and slow and shaking that it felt like it had been stored in her chest since 4:47 that morning. And then she cried, not loudly, not in a way that anyone would hear or see, just the quiet, private kind of crying that a person does when they have been strong for a very long time, and the thing they were holding finally becomes too heavy to hold anymore. She cried for 11 years. For crisp bed corners and perfectly folded towels and clean mirrors she had polished to a shine for strangers who never knew her name. She cried for the elderly man on floor 3, who sometimes forgot what floor he lived on, and whom she had gently walked back to his room 4 times without ever mentioning it to anyone. She cried for the honeymooning couple in 904 who ordered the cheapest thing on the room's service menu and left their shoes outside the door neatly paired, trying so hard to seem like they belonged there. She cried for the little girl in the lobby. She cried for 11 years of doing her job with her whole heart, and she cried because her whole heart had not been enough. After a while, she wiped her face with the sleeve of her uniform. She looked at herself in the rearview mirror, just for a moment, just to see who was still there. She was still there. She put her key in the ignition and drove home. At her kitchen table, she opened her notebook to a blank page. Her mother had taught her this. When life gets confusing, write down what you know. The facts, not the feelings. The feelings will try to drown you. The facts keep your feet on the ground. She wrote, savings, $2,140. Rent, $870 per month. Car payment, $247 per month. Health insurance through the hotel. Ends Friday. Tamara cannot help. Tamara has her own loans. So she put the pen down. She looked at the numbers. Then she picked up her phone and called her daughter. Tamara answered on the second ring, which meant she had not been far from the phone. She never was when something felt off. She had her mother's instincts that way. Mama! The word came out warm, a little careful. You okay? Hey, baby, Celestine said. Her voice only shook a little. Just a little. Tamara heard it immediately. She always heard the things her mother chose not to say. What happened? And Celestine told her everything. The footage review, the clipboard, Gerald Pruitt's practice frown and his 3 violations, a note, a blanket, a towel. She told it plainly, without drama, the way she always told hard things. When she finished, Tamara was quiet for a moment. Mama, she said finally, you gave Michael Jordan an extra towel. I gave the man an extra towel, Celestine confirmed. A pause. When Tamara spoke again, her voice was very quiet and very fierce, the way it got when she was absolutely sure about something and trying not to cry at the same time. That man has no idea what you lost today. Celestine looked out her kitchen window at the street going gray in the late afternoon light. No, she said softly. He doesn't. She hung up. She heated soup. She sat at the table and ate it slowly, watching the sky go from orange to purple to the deep blue that comes just before full dark. The streetlights clicked on one by one outside her window like small promises. She went to bed early. She lay in the dark and listened to Mr. Beaumont pacing overhead. Slow, steady, back and forth, and she closed her eyes and let the sound of it settle over her, like something almost like comfort. She did not know what morning was bringing. She just slept. Michael Jordan had, by this point in his life, stayed in more hotel rooms than he could count. He had stayed in rooms so grand that the curtains alone cost more than most families spent on a month of groceries. He had stayed in roadside motels during charity drives, through small southern towns, places where the coffee came from a machine in the hallway and the ice bucket had a crack in it. He had slept in hotel rooms on 6 continents in a career that had taken him places the boy from Wilmington, North Carolina could never have imagined. He had learned a long time ago that you could not judge a hotel by the size of its chandelier or the weight of its lobby doors. The real character of a place lived in the small things, the things that nobody told you to look for. A mint on the pillow was policy, but a note left by a housekeeper in careful handwriting, wishing you a good evening, was a person. He knew the difference. He had always known the difference. He came back to room 1612 that Tuesday evening at 6:43 p.m. His feet ached in the particular way that they only ached after a full afternoon on a basketball court. He had spent the day at the youth clinic he ran every October in Charlotte. 200 children, ages 8 to 15, on 4 side-by-side courts at a gymnasium just north of the city. He moved between them all afternoon, Sharon crouching down to adjust a stance here, calling out encouragement there, answering the same questions he had been answering for 30 years, with the same patience and the same genuine interest. Because the questions were never really about basketball. They were about whether someone believed in you enough to show up. He believed in that. He always had. He rode the elevator to the 16th floor. He walked the long carpeted hallway to his room. He opened the door, dropped his bag, shrugged out of his jacket. He went into the bathroom. He stopped. There were 3 towels on the rack. He stood in the doorway of the bathroom and looked at them for a moment. White, neatly folded, stacked in that precise way hotel housekeepers had. A tri-fold that somehow always looked more careful than anything you could manage yourself. So 2 towels was the standard at Grand Alderton Properties. He knew this because he had stayed at Alderton hotels before, and because he had a habit, formed over decades of life on the road, of noticing exactly what he was given and asking for nothing extra. He did not want to be a burden to the people who took care of the rooms. He never had. He had not requested a 3rd towel. But there it was. Someone had left it for him, not because they were told to, because they looked at the rack and saw what it would feel like to come back after a long day to only 2 towels. And they decided to do something about it. A small decision, a quiet one, made in an empty room when no one was watching. Michael Jordan took a shower. He dried off. He sat on the edge of the king bed in his robe, and he thought about that for a while. And then he picked up the hotel phone and dialed the front desk. "Good evening, Mr. Jordan," said the young man at the front desk, with the kind of careful cheerfulness that people used when they were trying not to sound nervous. "Good evening," Michael said. "Could you connect me to housekeeping?" A brief pause. "Of course, sir. One moment." The line clicked. A woman picked up, night shift, her voice bright and a little surprised to be receiving a call from the 16th floor at this hour. "Housekeeping, this is Priscilla." "Priscilla," Michael said, "I'm in room 1612. I was hoping you could tell me who serviced my room this morning." He could hear her fingers moving across a keyboard. "Of course, let me pull that up." A short pause. "Room 1612, Tuesday service. That was assigned to Celestine Mayweather. She covers 16 on Tuesdays and Thursdays." "Is Ms. Mayweather on shift tonight?" he asked. Priscilla paused. He could hear the silence change, the way silences do when a person is reading something on a screen that they did not expect to read. "Oh, no, sir, she is not." Another pause. "It looks like Miss Mayweather is no longer with the hotel. As of today." Michael was quiet. "As of today," he repeated. "Yes, sir. I'm sorry. That's all I can see." He thanked her. He set the phone back in its cradle. He sat with that information the way you sit with something that is still taking shape, turning it over slowly, looking at it from different angles, waiting for it to become fully clear. A housekeeper leaves an extra towel. That same day, she is no longer employed by the hotel. He did not need to be told what had happened in between. He had been in the world long enough to understand how the math of small, unauthorized kindnesses worked at places run by people who cared more about policy than about people. He felt something settle in his chest, not anger, something quieter and more certain than anger. He picked up his cell phone and called Marcus Webb. Marcus answered on the second ring. He always answered on the second ring, not the first, which would seem frantic, and not the third, which would seem slow. 9 years together, and Marcus had never changed that. "I need you to find someone," Michael said. "Her name is Celestine Mayweather. She worked at this hotel until today." He paused. "Get me her address and clear my morning." "How early?" Marcus asked. He was already typing. "Early enough," Michael said. "I want to be at her door before she's had to sit too long with it." A brief pause on the line. Then Marcus said simply, "Understood." It was past 11 when Marcus called back. He had found Celestine Mayweather, her address on Ridgewood Avenue, 22 years in Charlotte, a quiet digital footprint that told the story of a woman who had lived carefully and given generously and never once asked anyone to notice. But it was the last thing Marcus had found that changed the feeling of the whole evening. A community feature from the Charlotte Observer, 5 years old, a literacy volunteer program for adults, a group photograph, and in the back row, with kind eyes and dark hair pulled neatly back, a woman whose name appeared beneath the photo in small type. Celestine Mayweather. Volunteering every Saturday for 3 years. Marcus texted the link without comment. Michael read it. He set his phone face down on the nightstand and looked at the ceiling for a long time. 3 towels. 3 years of Saturday mornings. A woman who kept giving her time and her heart and her extra towel to people who needed them without a single person asking her to. He made 3 more phone calls before midnight. By 1 a.m., everything was arranged. He turned off the lamp. In the dark, he could just make out the shape of the bathroom doorway, the faint white rectangle of 3 folded towels on the rack. He closed his eyes. He slept the sound, certain sleep of a man who knows exactly what he is going to do in the morning. Celestine woke up at 4:47 again. Her body did not know it was unemployed. It did not know that there was no uniform hanging on the back of the bathroom door, no cart waiting in the service corridor of the 16th floor, no schedule pinned to the break room corkboard with her name on it. Her body only knew one thing: 4:47 means up. And so she was up. She lay in the gray dark for a moment, just a moment, with the ceiling above her and the quiet of the apartment pressing in around her. She could hear Mr. Beaumont upstairs already pacing. She had thought, going to bed, that the sound of his footsteps would be comforting the way it usually was. Instead, it just made her feel how still she was. He was moving. She had nowhere to move to. She let herself feel it. She had not let herself feel it the night before. Not fully. She had held herself together for the drive home, for the notebook and the numbers, but for the phone call with Tamara. She had been careful and practical and composed, the way her mother had taught her to be, and then she had gone to bed and stared at the ceiling and waited for sleep like it was a late bus she wasn't sure was coming. But now, in the very first minutes of this new Wednesday, she let the unfairness of it be real. 11 years. 11 years of 4:47 alarms and dark blue pants and floors polished until they gave back a person's reflection. 11 years of learning which guests needed quiet and which ones needed a cheerful good morning, of knowing that the man in 312 liked extra hangers and the woman in 508 always forgot her phone charger and needed it left on the nightstand with a note. 11 years of doing the job, not just correctly, but with the whole of herself. And it had ended with a clipboard, a practice frown, and a folded towel. She got up. She made her coffee. She put on jeans and a yellow cardigan and her house slippers, and the jeans felt wrong in a way she could not quite name. Too soft, too casual, like clothing that belonged to a woman with somewhere comfortable to be instead of nowhere at all. She sat down at her kitchen table with her mug and opened her notebook to a fresh page and began doing the only thing she knew how to do when the ground moved beneath her. She made a plan. Step 1, finish her coffee. Step 2, update her resume. Step 3, search job listings. Step 4, apply to at least 3 positions before noon. She was on step 1, her pen making slow circles in the margin of the notebook, the way it did when her thoughts were moving faster than her hand, when the knock came. She looked up, as she looked at the clock on the kitchen wall. 8:14 a.m. She was not expecting anyone. She was not the kind of woman people dropped in on. She set her mug down carefully and walked to the door and opened it. The man standing in her doorway was tall and somewhere in his 30s. He wore a neat charcoal button-down shirt, no tie, and dark slacks, and he had the particular stillness of someone who had spent years being the most reliable person in every room he entered. His eyes were calm. His posture was straight. He held nothing in his hands, which for some reason made him seem trustworthy. "Ms. Mayweather?" he said. "Yes. My name is Marcus Webb." He said it the way people say things they have rehearsed just enough to sound unrehearsed. "I work for Michael Jordan. Mr. Jordan would very much like to speak with you this morning, if you're willing. He's downstairs." Celestine looked at the man. She looked at him for a long, careful moment, the way she looked at everything that surprised her. Steadily, without letting the surprise show too much on her face, taking it in and turning it over and deciding what she thought about it. "Downstairs," she said. "Yes, ma'am." He drove over himself. He didn't want to call ahead because he was afraid you might say no. Something about that detail, the honesty of it, the almost apologetic way it was offered, made her pause. She looked past Marcus's shoulder and down the exterior stairwell of her building. Concrete steps, iron railing, a rectangle of sidewalk at the bottom where the morning light was still pale and new. And standing on that sidewalk, in a plain gray sweatshirt and dark pants, was a man she had seen on television since she was a young woman. A man whose name meant something to the whole country and whose room she had cleaned less than 24 hours ago. He was very tall. She had known that from the room, the way the bed had been clearly not long enough, the way his shoes near the door were enormous. But seeing him on her sidewalk made it different, real, present. He was looking up at her, and his face was not what she expected. There was no celebrity smoothness to it, no performance, no careful public expression. He looked the way a person looks when they have done something wrong by accident and are standing outside your door because they cannot think of any other right thing to do. He looked sorry. She went back inside for one moment. And as she traded her house slippers for shoes, she did not fix her hair. She did not put on anything better than the yellow cardigan because she had not known she needed to, and because she was not the kind of woman who dressed for people rather than for herself. She came downstairs. She crossed the sidewalk and stopped a few feet from Michael Jordan and looked at him the same way she looked at everyone, directly, steadily, with the particular quiet dignity that had never been something she cultivated or practiced. It was simply the way she was made. "Miss Mayweather," he said. His voice was deep and deliberate, unhurried. Up close, his eyes were darker than she had expected and warmer than she had expected. And they did not slide away from hers the way some powerful people's eyes did when they talked to hotel staff. "Mr. E. Jordan," she said. He did not smile. He did not offer a hand. He just looked at her and said, "I want to apologize." She blinked. Of all the things she had imagined, and she had imagined several things in the 30 seconds it had taken her to come downstairs, an apology had not been among them. "The towel," he said. "I came back to the room last night and I saw 3 towels on the rack. I knew that wasn't standard. I called down to housekeeping and found out who had serviced the room, and then I found out that she was no longer employed there as of that same day." He stopped. "Let that sit. Then, that happened because of something done for me. A woman lost a job she had held for 11 years because she was kind to me. I am sorry for that." Celestine looked at him for a long moment. "It wasn't your fault," she said. "Meg, I knew the policy. I made the choice." "You made the right choice," he said. She held his gaze. "Gerald Pruitt didn't see it that way." "No," Michael said quietly. "He didn't." A beat of silence, brief and full. "But I'd like to try to make it right, if you'll let me." Celestine folded her arms, not in defensiveness. She was not a defensive woman. It was simply how she stood when she was thinking something through with her whole mind before she answered. She could feel the October morning around her, cool and clean, a car passing on the street behind him, the ordinary Wednesday world going about its business, while something very unordinary was happening on her sidewalk. "I'm not looking for charity, Mr. Jordan." "I know that," he said. "This isn't charity." He glanced to his left. Marcus stepped forward and held out a sealed white envelope. Her name was written on the front in neat, unhurried handwriting. Not printed, not typed. Written. As if the person who addressed it had wanted it to feel personal. She took it. She looked at it. She turned it over in her hands. "Open it," Michael said. She opened it. Inside was a single folded letter. She unfolded it and began to read. The morning was quiet. A bird called from somewhere in the trees along the block. Marcus stood a few paces back, watching nothing in particular, giving her the privacy of the moment while still being present in it. She read slowly, then she went back to the top and read it again. Her hands were very still, but her eyes moved across the words with a speed and urgency that her stillness could not hide. And something in her face was changing as she read. Something private and deep and enormous, like a door opening slowly in a room that had been shut for a very long time. She looked up. "This isn't real," she said. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "It is," he said. "This is—" She stopped. She pressed her lips together. She looked down at the letter, then up at him, and there was something in her eyes that was not yet tears, but was very close to the country where tears come from. And here, right here on this sidewalk, in the October morning, with a letter held in two still hands, is where we must pause. Because what was written on that page is the very thing this story has been moving towards since the moment Celestine Mayweather reached into her cart and chose, quietly and alone, to do one more kind thing. Mush, you will know what it says. But first, you need to know who she was before this morning. What she had built from nothing, and what she had given away for free, and what all of it together means. Because without that, what's in that envelope is just a letter. With it, it is everything. Before we go back to the sidewalk, before we return to the letter and the still hands and the face that was changing like a door slowly opening, you need to know who Celestine Mayweather was before this Wednesday morning found her. Not who she was at work, not who she was in her uniform with the stitch patch and the cart full of folded towels, who she was underneath all of that. The whole long story of a woman who had been quietly giving pieces of herself away for 53 years and never once asked for a receipt. Celestine Mayweather was born in 1971 in a town called Tupelo Crossing, Mississippi. It was the kind of town that did not appear on most maps. A main road, a church, a post office that shared its building with a hardware store, and a few hundred people who all knew each other's business and most of each other's pain. She was the middle child of 5. Her father, Leonard, drove long-haul trucks and was gone more than he was home. Her mother, Ida May, cleaned houses, not her own, other people's. Big houses on the quiet, shaded side of town. Houses with wide front porches and clean windows and rooms that needed tending every week by someone whose name the owners did not always remember. Celestine used to go with her mother on Saturday mornings during the summer, small and watchful, and her carrying the extra bottle of floor polish or the clean rags in a paper bag. She watched her mother work, not shuffle through the motions, work. Ida May Mayweather moved through a room the way a musician moves through a piece of music, with attention, with care, with something that looked from the outside like pride and felt from the inside like love. "You do this work with your whole name on it," Ida May told her once, wringing out a mop with her strong, wide hands. "Every surface you touch, you leave it saying, 'Ida May Mayweather was here, and she did right.' That's all you can control, so you control that." Celestine had been 8 years old when she heard those words. She was 53 years old now. She had never once forgotten them. She moved to Charlotte at 22, following a man named Darnell who was charming in all the ways that are easy to mistake for good. Darnell lasted 8 months. Charlotte lasted a lifetime. She found work cleaning office buildings downtown, long quiet nights with a vacuum and a cart, empty hallways and fluorescent lights, and the particular piece of a space no one is watching you occupy. She was good at it. She was always good at whatever she turned her hands to. Then a hotel, then a better hotel. Then, at 42, after years of applications and one very important interview with a kind woman in HR named Sylvia, who saw something in Celestine that the others had missed. She got the job at the Grand Alderton. Full benefits, steady hours, a cart with a squeaky left wheel that she learned to compensate for after the first week. She stayed for 11 years. Hey, but the job was never the best thing that happened to her in Charlotte. The best thing was Tamara. Tamara's father, a quiet man named Winston, had loved Celestine the way some people love things. Sincerely, but without the stamina to stay. He left when Tamara was 3 years old in the middle of a Tuesday, while Celestine was at work. He left a note on the kitchen table. It said he was sorry. It said he wasn't good enough for them. It said he hoped they would be all right. Celestine had read the note twice, folded it into quarters, put it in the kitchen drawer, and gone to pick up Tamara from her neighbor Mrs. Franklin's apartment. She had held her daughter on her lap that evening and read her 3 picture books and given her a bath and sung to her until she fell asleep. She had not cried until Tamara was asleep. And then she had cried for a long time. Then she had stopped and gone to bed. She did not have the luxury of falling apart for longer than one night. There was a child. There was rent. There was a life to build. So she built it. She worked double shifts when Tamara was small so she could afford a better school. One with art classes and a reading program, and a teacher named Ms. Holloway who noticed the way Tamara's eyes lit up around books and who stayed after school twice a week to read with her. She packed Tamara's lunch every single morning until Tamara was 12 and came home one afternoon with her chin tilted and said, "Mama, I'm too old for that." And Celestine had laughed, a real laugh, the proud kind, and said, "All right, baby, make your own." She saved money the way other people save breath, carefully, because there was never quite enough of it. 4 years of setting aside whatever she could after rent and food and Tamara's school shoes and the car that always needed something. 4 years of a savings account she looked at every month and calculated. The way you calculate distance when you can see where you're going, but you are not there yet. The goal was college. Tamara wanted to be a nurse. She had wanted it since she was 8 years old and had gone with Celestine to the clinic when Celestine had a bad cough. And a nurse named Patricia had been so steady and so kind that Tamara had said on the way home, "I want to do what she does." And Celestine had said, "Then you will." Not as comfort, as fact, she did. Tamara went to a small nursing college in Greensboro. It was not famous. It did not have a famous name or a grand old campus with tall stone buildings, but it had an excellent program and an acceptance letter with Tamara's name on it. And on the morning it arrived, Celestine had stood in the kitchen and held it with both hands and felt something shift in her chest that she recognized as the feeling of something being completed. Tamara graduated on a sunny May morning with Celestine in the second row, wearing the blue dress she saved for occasions. She cried the entire drive home. Not the sad kind, the full kind, the kind that comes when something you have worked toward for years finally becomes real, and the reality of it is almost too large to hold inside a single body. Tamara was a nurse. Tamara had done it. Celestine had helped her do it. That was enough, more than enough. It was, in many ways, the whole point. The literacy program had come into her life 5 years ago on a Sunday morning. She had been in her usual pew at Mount Calvary Baptist, half listening to the announcements after the service. Fundraisers and food drives and the women's breakfast on the third Saturday of the month, when a small handwritten flyer appeared in the pew pocket in front of her. Adults learning to read, volunteers needed, Saturday mornings, community center on Albemarle Road. She had sat with it in her lap for the rest of the service. Reading is everything. She had known that since she was a girl sitting on a porch in Tupelo Crossing, sounding out words in a library book while her mother worked inside. She had known it when she watched Tamara's eyes light up around stories. She had known it every time she quietly helped a hotel guest navigate the checkout form because the words gave them trouble, and she could see the shame of it on their faces. She showed up the following Saturday. The community center smelled like old carpet and coffee. A woman named Dorothy ran the program, small, gray-haired, with quick, dark eyes and the energy of someone 20 years younger. She had shaken Celestine's hand with both of hers, which was the way Celestine's mother always shook hands, and which immediately made her feel that she was in the right place. "We need good people," Dorothy said. "Are you a good person?" Celestine thought about it honestly, the way the question deserved. "I try to be," she said. "Good enough," Dorothy said. "Come in." Her first student was a man named Reginald Oates. He was 58 years old and had spent 30 years loading cargo at a warehouse in West Charlotte. He was broad-shouldered and quiet and had kept a secret that he could not read more than his own name and a handful of common signs from nearly everyone in his life. His coworkers thought he was slow to fill out forms because he was careful. His daughter thought he didn't read her letters because he was busy. His church thought he held the hymnal open out of habit rather than need. He carried this secret the way heavy things get carried, silently with the muscles tightened against it, and the occasional prayer that no one would ask him to set it down in public. When he sat across from Celestine for the first time at a small folding table in the corner of the community center, he would not meet her eyes. Miss Celestine put her hands flat on the table. She waited until he looked up. Then she said quietly and without any softness that was also pity, "Nobody is going to make you feel small in this room. Not today, not any day, not while I'm sitting across from you. You understand?" Reginald looked at her for a long moment. Something in him weighed it, tested it for truth, the way a man who has been embarrassed often learns to test things. Then he nodded. They worked together every Saturday for 14 months. Reginald was not a fast learner, but he was a faithful one, and Celestine had understood early on that faithful was worth more than fast. He showed up every week. He practiced every night. He asked questions without embarrassment and corrected his mistakes without shame. Anna, because she had built a space where those things were allowed. By the 14th month, he could read a newspaper. Not every word, but the headlines, the first paragraphs, the names and the dates and the shape of the news that the rest of the world had been reading for decades while he stood outside of it. He read his daughter a birthday card he had written himself. His own words, in his own hand. It was the first one. She did not know that. She just thought it was a beautiful card from her father. She cried when she read it. He called Celestine that evening and told her. His voice was not steady on the phone. Hers was not either. She had 4 students now, all different, all carrying something heavy that they had agreed, one brave Saturday at a time, to set down long enough to learn. And this was who Celestine Mayweather was. Not just the woman with the cart, not just the housekeeper with the extra towel. A woman who had grown up watching her mother leave her name on every surface she touched. A woman who had raised a daughter alone on double shifts and careful savings and absolute unwavering belief. A woman who gave her Saturday mornings to strangers who needed them, without fanfare, without a photo in the paper, or almost without one, without anything except the deep, simple satisfaction of knowing that she had done a right thing. For 53 years, she had been putting goodness into the world and asking nothing back. And now she was standing on a sidewalk in a yellow cardigan, holding a letter, and the world was trying, imperfectly, unexpectedly, through the strange instrument of a famous man in a gray sweatshirt, to answer. Michael Jordan was watching her face. He had stood across from governors and athletes and people who had more power in a single phone call than most people would ever hold. He knew the difference between a person performing a feeling and a person actually having one. He had played the game long enough to know a real move from a fake one. Celestine Mayweather was not performing anything. Her face was doing something quiet and enormous and entirely genuine. The face of a woman who has spent a lifetime giving and has just been handed something back and does not quite know what to do with the weight of being seen. "Why?" she said finally. Her voice was steady, just barely. "Because it was the right thing," Michael said. She looked at him. "Eva, you don't know me." "No," he said, "but Marcus found the article, the observer, the volunteer photo, the woman in the back row." He paused. "That was you." Her eyes went sharp and soft at the exact same moment. 2 things at once. The way eyes do when a person recognizes that they have been truly looked at. "You did your homework," she said. "I tried to," he said. The October morning held them both for a moment on that sidewalk. A man who had changed the way a generation understood greatness. A woman who had changed the way Reginald Oates understood himself. 2 very different kinds of great, standing 4 feet apart on a concrete sidewalk on Ridgewood Avenue. "I have one question," Celestine said. He waited. "That towel," she looked at him evenly. "Was it a good one? Did it actually help?" A pause. Something crossed Michael Jordan's face. Surprise. And then something warm behind the surprise. And then he laughed. A real laugh. The full, surprised, unguarded kind that a person cannot manufacture. The kind that changes the whole shape of a face and makes the person inside it briefly visible. "It was a great towel," he said. And Celestine Mayweather, for the first time since Tuesday morning, for the first time since Gerald Pruitt and his clipboard in the cold parking garage, smiled. "The time has come. You have waited long enough. You have walked with Celestine through the cold parking garage and the kitchen table with the numbers that did not add up. You have watched her peel a photograph off a locker door. You have stood with her at a folding table across from a man who was scared and proud in equal measure, and you have heard the laugh. Michael Jordan's real, unguarded laugh on a Wednesday morning sidewalk. And you have earned the right to know what was written on those pages. Here is what was in the letter. Michael Jordan had made 3 phone calls the night before after Marcus sent him the article. After he had read it twice and set the phone face down and looked at the ceiling of room 1612 with 3 white towels visible in the bathroom doorway. 3 calls, past midnight, because some things cannot wait until morning. The first call was to a woman named Adrienne Coles. Adrienne was the executive director of a nonprofit organization in Charlotte called the Open Door Fund. It was a foundation that put money and resources and real human attention into small businesses, job training, and community development programs in the parts of Charlotte that bigger organizations drove past without stopping. Michael had sat on its advisory board for 4 years. He had donated to it in the quiet way that he preferred, without press releases, without ceremonies, without his name on anything. He told Adrienne about Celestine, all of it, the 11 years, the note written for the woman who couldn't read the checkout form, the blanket for the cold child, the towel. He told her about the Saturday mornings in the community center and the man named Reginald who had learned to write his daughter a birthday card. Adrienne was quiet through most of it. She was a woman who listened before she spoke, which was one of the reasons Michael trusted her. When he finished, she was silent for a moment. Then she said, "Michael, and we have been trying to hire a program coordinator for the neighborhood literacy expansion for 6 months. Full-time position, real salary, real resources. We need someone who knows what it actually feels like to sit across from a person who is scared and make them feel safe enough to try." A pause. "We have interviewed 14 people. None of them felt right." Michael said, "I think you just found her." Adrienne said, "Send me everything Marcus has." He did. The second call was to a man named Dominic Perry. Dominic owned a small collection of boutique hotels across the Carolinas called the Marquette Collection. They were not grand or famous. They were the kind of hotels where the staff remembered your name on your second visit, and the breakfast was made by someone who cared whether you liked it. Michael had invested in 2 of his properties 3 years ago, not because the returns were spectacular, but because Dominic ran his hotels the way Celestine cleaned rooms, with his whole name on everything. Michael told Dominic what had happened at the Grand Alderton. Dominic listened. He did not interrupt. When Michael reached the part about the towel, about the 3-strike policy, about 11 years ending in a parking garage in the middle of a Tuesday, there was a silence on the line that lasted several seconds. Then Dominic said, very quietly, "They fired her for a towel." In 11 years, Michael confirmed, not a single complaint, not a single guest who had anything but good things to say. Another silence. Then a sound that was not quite a word. The sound a man makes when something offends him so deeply that language is briefly insufficient. "Send me her information," Dominic said. "I will have a full offer letter ready before morning. Guest services manager at the Charlotte flagship. Full benefits. Starting wage $15 above what the Alderton was paying her. And if she wants a management track, she has one." "She may not want to go back to hotels at all," Michael said. "Then she has an option," Dominic said. "Nobody should wake up the morning after being fired and feel like they have no choice. That's not right." Michael agreed. It was not right. The third call was the longest. He called Patricia Osei at 20 minutes past midnight. Patricia was an employment lawyer with a practice in Charlotte. She was also a person Michael had known for 11 years. Sharp, principled, someone who had spent her career taking cases that mattered more than they paid. He laid out the situation. Patricia listened the way lawyers listen, not passively but actively, turning the facts over in her mind as he spoke, sorting them into categories he couldn't see but could almost hear clicking into place. When he finished, she asked 3 questions, precise ones, about the timeline of the written warnings, about whether Celestine had received anything in writing about each incident, about the hotel's stated policy and whether there were other employees who had received exceptions to it. Then she said, 3 documented write-ups for compassionate acts, all occurring within the same quarter, are at a hotel where a high-profile guest was present during the final incident. The termination executed the same day as the guest's stay, within hours. She paused. "That is a pattern worth examining." "I thought it might be," Michael said. "I'd like to speak with Ms. Mayweather," Patricia said. "At no cost to her. Whatever she decides to do with it is her choice entirely. But she should know her rights before she makes that decision." "Agreed," Michael said. And that was the third call. So here at last is what Celestine unfolded on a sidewalk on Ridgewood Avenue on a Wednesday morning in October, with the pale sun coming up behind the buildings and a bird calling somewhere in the trees, and Marcus Webb standing quietly a few paces back. 3 pages. The first was a formal job offer on Open Door Fund letterhead. Ooh, full-time program coordinator, neighborhood literacy expansion, office space, program budget, administrative support, and at the bottom of the page, in clear, unhurried type, annual salary, $58,000. The second was a letter from the Marquette Collection, signed by Dominic Perry himself. Guest services manager, Charlotte flagship location, full benefits starting immediately, a management track, and a handwritten note at the bottom of the typed letter in ink that said, "We hire people who care. You clearly do." The third was a small white card. On the front, Patricia Osei, employment law. On the back in neat handwriting, "Your termination may not have been legal. Call me. There is no charge for the conversation." 3 pages, 3 doors where the day before there had been a wall. Celestine read all 3 pages once. Then she went back to the top and read them again. Her hands did not shake. She was not a woman whose hands shook, but they were very still. The deliberate stillness of a person who is holding something carefully because they do not want to drop it. She looked up. 53 years old, sore knees. A heart that had taken a hard blow less than 24 hours ago and was now being asked to hold something it had not been prepared for. She looked at Michael Jordan and she said the only thing she could think to say, "The literacy job." He waited, watching her face. "That's the one," she said. "If I'm choosing, that's the one I want." Something settled in his expression, not surprise. Something quieter than surprise. "That's the one I thought you'd choose," he said. She held up Patricia's card. "To end this? That is your decision," he said. "Only yours. I won't tell you what to do with it, but you have been walking around not knowing what your rights are, and that isn't right either." Celestine looked at the card for a long moment. She nodded once, slowly, the way she nodded when a thing had been decided, and she tucked it carefully into the pocket of her yellow cardigan. She folded the letter back into its envelope. She held the envelope against her chest with both hands, the way she had held Tamara's photo when she peeled it off the locker door, as if the thing inside it was small and important and needed protecting. "Mr. Jordan," she said. Her voice was very quiet. "Yes. In 53 years." She stopped. She started again. "Nobody has ever done something like this for me. I don't..." She shook her head slightly. "I don't quite know what to do with it." He looked at her steadily. "You already know what to do with it," he said. "You've known your whole life. You just do the next right thing." She held his gaze. Something passed between them on that sidewalk. Not words, not ceremony, just the plain and quiet recognition of 2 people who understand the same truth from completely different directions. She took a breath. "I'm going to go call my daughter," she said. "That sounds exactly right," he said. She looked at him one final time, not with the awe that some people might have felt, and not with the performance of gratitude that some people would have given. She looked at him the way her mother had taught her to look at people who did right, directly, fully, with the whole of her respect. "Thank you," she said, all the way down. "No," Michael Jordan said, and his voice was genuine and simple and completely without performance. "Thank you for the towel." He turned. He walked back to the black SUV idling at the curb. He got in. Marcus got in after him. The door closed. The SUV pulled away from the curb, moved down Ridgewood Avenue, turned at the corner, and was gone. Celestine stood on the sidewalk alone. The morning was quiet. The bird was still calling in the trees above the building. The October air was cool on her face and clean in her lungs. She stood there for a moment longer than she needed to, just breathing, just being still inside the changed shape of a day that had started at 4:47 with nowhere to go, and had become something she did not yet have words for. Then she turned and went upstairs to call her daughter. Celestine went upstairs. She went slowly, one hand on the iron railing, feeling the cool metal under her palm and the familiar give of the second step from the top that always creaked. She had climbed these stairs 10,000 times, She knew every sound they made. Today they felt different, lighter, or maybe she was the one who felt lighter, as if something that had been pressing down on her chest since Tuesday had finally been allowed to lift. She unlocked her door. She went inside. She stood in the middle of her kitchen for a moment, still holding the envelope against her chest, and looked at the room. The coffee mug, the open notebook with the pen across it, the photo of Tamara above the sink. And now the ordinary kitchen of a woman who had woken up that morning with nowhere to go and nothing certain, and who was now standing in it with 3 doors where there had been a wall. She sat down at the table. She set the envelope in front of her. She picked up her phone and dialed. Tamara answered on the first ring. Not the second, the first, which told Celestine everything she needed to know about how her daughter had spent the morning. She had not been far from her phone. She had not been able to sleep properly. She had been waiting, the way she always waited when something was happening with her mother. Coiled and alert and trying to seem calm, the same way Celestine had learned to wait when Tamara was small and sick, and Celestine sat up beside her in the dark. "Mama!" Tamara's voice came out in a rush. "What happened?" "Hush, tell me everything. Start from the beginning and don't leave anything out." So Celestine told her. She told it plainly, the way she always told hard things, and now the not-so-hard things too. She described Marcus at the door in his charcoal button-down, his hands empty, his voice careful. She described looking past his shoulder and down the stairwell, at the tall man on the sidewalk in the gray sweatshirt, how he had looked up at her and his face had not been what she expected. She told Tamara about the apology. She heard her daughter's sharp intake of breath at that. The apology was the part Tamara had not seen coming either. Then she told her about the envelope. She described opening it on the sidewalk, reading it once, reading it again. She went through all 3 pages in order. The open door fund letter, the Marquette collection offer, Patricia Ossi's card. She kept her voice steady and even, the way she had kept it through everything else this week, the way Ida May had taught her. And then she said the number, $58,000 a year, to run the literacy program, with a real office and a real budget and real resources, and her Saturdays no longer donated, but paid for, finally valued by something other than her own heart. There was silence on the line. Then Tamara made a sound. It was not a word. It was the sound that lives just below words when words are not large enough to hold what a person is feeling. A soft, broken, completely helpless sound that Celestine had not heard from her daughter since Tamara was very small, and something had hurt her, and she didn't know yet how to carry it. "Mama," Tamara said, and her voice was completely undone. "Mama." "Baby." Celestine's own voice was very soft. "Don't cry." "I'm not crying," Tamara said instantly. Celestine waited. "I'm not." A small, wet hiccup. "Okay, I'm crying." And Celestine laughed. She sat at her kitchen table in her yellow cardigan with the October sun coming in sideways through the window, warming the side of her face, and she laughed in a way she had not laughed in 2 full days. Real laughing, the kind that starts in the stomach and comes up through the chest and has nothing careful about it. Her daughter was crying in Atlanta. The coffee in her mug had gone completely cold. The notebook was still open to the page with the numbers that had frightened her the night before. And Celestine Mayweather was laughing. "You deserve this," Tamara said when she had pulled herself back together, her voice fierce now, the fierceness that always came after the tears. "Mama, you deserve this so much. Do you understand that?" "I'm grateful for it," Celestine said. "I don't know about deserve." "I know about deserve," Tamara said, as though the matter was settled and not up for discussion. "You have been putting goodness into this world since before I was old enough to see it. All those years, all those people, the man you taught to read, the little girl with the blanket, every person you ever quietly looked after in every room of that hotel without anyone ever knowing your name." Her voice caught once more. "And now look, Mama." Celestine was quiet for a moment. She looked out the window at the street below, watched the ordinary Wednesday Charlotte street with its parked cars and its trees going orange at the edges. "And now a towel came back around," she said softly. The line was quiet for a beat. Then Tamara laughed too, surprised into it, the good surprise kind. and they were both laughing together across the 300 miles between Charlotte and Atlanta. And it was the finest sound Celestine had heard in a very long time. They stayed on the phone for another hour. They talked about everything, about whether Celestine would call Patricia Osei and what that conversation might look like, about what Reginald was going to say when he heard about the literacy center and his mother's face if she ever found out that a Saturday morning volunteer now had her own program and her own budget. And about whether Celestine needed new clothes for her first day. Not the uniform, not the dark blue pants, something that was just hers. "I'll take you shopping," Tamara said. "You absolutely do not have to do that." "I know I don't have to." A pause, steady and warm. "I want to. I'm coming up next weekend." "Tamara, the drive is 3 hours." "Mama." Just the one word. Quiet, full, final. Celestine stopped arguing. "Okay," she said. "Come on up." After she hung up, she did not move for a while. She sat with the silence of the apartment and the envelope on the table in front of her, and the particular feeling of a life that had shifted on its axis overnight and was still settling into its new position. Then she pulled the notebook toward her and picked up the pen. Not to write numbers, not a budget, not a list of practical next steps, not the careful accounting of what she had and what she owed. She had done enough of that kind of writing. She wrote 7 words. She wrote them slowly, pressing the pen with intention, the way her mother had taught her to do anything worth doing. The extra towel was not a mistake. She looked at it. She added 4 more. The extra towel was the beginning. She closed the notebook. She got up and put the kettle on. Outside, the October morning was still going quietly about its business, the way the world does when it has just handed someone something enormous and does not need to make a fuss about it. Inside, Celestine Mayweather stood at her kitchen window and waited for the water to boil, and felt, for the first time in as long as she could clearly remember, like everything was exactly as it was supposed to be. April came to Charlotte the way it always did, slowly, then all at once. One week the trees were bare, and the mornings were still sharp with cold, and then almost overnight the dogwoods bloomed white along Tryon Street, and the air smelled like cut grass, impossibility, and people who had been walking with their shoulders hunched against winter began to straighten up as they moved through the city, as if the season had given them permission to take up more space. Celestine noticed all of it from her window. She had a window now, 4th floor, northeast corner, the open door fund offices on Tryon Street in uptown Charlotte. She could see the crowns of 3 large oak trees and a long slice of blue Carolina sky, and on clear days, eyed the distant shape of the city tapering off toward the horizon. It was not a grand view. It was a real one. She preferred real. She had put 2 things on her desk in the first week and had not moved them since. On the left, the photograph of Tamara at 7 years old standing at the edge of Lake Norman, holding a fish up with both hands like it was treasure, gap-toothed and laughing into the sun. On the right, a small wooden frame she had bought at a craft store for $4, holding an index card on which she had written in her own careful handwriting, with a blue pen that she pressed deliberately into the paper. Do the next right thing. Those were the only decorations she needed. Everything else could take care of itself. The neighborhood literacy expansion had changed shape almost from the moment Celestine arrived. When in her first week, she had sat in her new office with a yellow notepad and a cup of coffee and made a list of everyone she knew who was good with people, patient, and had a few hours to spare on Saturday mornings. She called former teachers who had retired and were quietly going restless with the quiet. She called retired librarians whose whole lives had been built around putting the right words into the right hands. She called 2 college students who were looking for service hours and ended up staying long after the hours were fulfilled because they discovered they loved it. She called 2 women she had worked beside at the Grand Alderton for years. Donna, who had always been the first to stop her cart and help a lost guest find their floor, and Bernadette, who remembered every repeat visitor's name without being told twice. Both of them had something in them that cleaning rooms had never quite been large enough to hold. They said yes immediately. She gave Reginald Oates a volunteer position on the spot. He came every Saturday now, arriving 15 minutes early the way he always had when something mattered to him, and he worked with two new students who were right at the very beginning. The place he himself had stood not so long ago, scared and proud, and carrying a secret too heavy to put down alone. He was the best volunteer she had, and the reason was simple. He remembered. He remembered every moment of it, the shame and the hope, and the exact feeling of a word finally clicking into place in your mind like a key in a lock you had been turning for months. He did not let anyone feel small on his side of the table. He had learned that from Celestine, and now he was teaching it forward. 6 months in, the program had grown from 4 volunteers and 11 students to 22 volunteers and 68 students spread across 3 community centers in different neighborhoods of Charlotte. Not because of any grand plan or fundraising campaign, simply because one person told another person, and that person told someone else. And word moved through a community the way word always moves when something real is happening. Person to person, quietly, with trust. On the morning of Celestine's first day, back in November, Adrienne Coles had appeared in the doorway of her new office with 2 cups of coffee and a smile that suggested she had been waiting a long time for this particular person to be sitting in this particular chair. "How are you settling in?" Adrienne had asked, handing her a cup. Celestine had looked around the office. The desk, the window, the walls that were still bare, the carpet that was a sensible gray. She had felt the absence of a cart in the hallway. She had felt the unfamiliar stillness of a space that was hers to stay in, rather than to clean and leave. "I keep waiting for someone to come in and tell me to change the sheets," she said. Adrienne had laughed, a full, delighted laugh. "You don't have to change the sheets anymore." "I know," Celestine said. She had looked down at her coffee cup for a moment. "I almost miss it." She didn't, not truly, but she said it because part of her would always hold those 11 years with care, rather than bitterness. Would always believe that the work had been good and honest work, even if the ending had not been fair. Her mother had taught her that too. You can be wronged by a situation without being destroyed by it. The work was still the work. The years were still the years. Nobody could take back the floors she had polished, or the beds she had made, or the guests she had quietly and steadily looked after. Those things had happened. They were real. They belonged to her. Patricia Osei had called Celestine 3 days after the Wednesday morning sidewalk meeting, and they had talked for 45 minutes about the case. Carefully, clearly, with Patricia laying out the shape of it without pressure or promise, simply making sure Celestine understood what she was holding. The pattern in the records was what mattered. 3 documented write-ups in a single quarter. 3 acts of compassion, each one logged as a rule violation by the same supervisor. No prior incidents in 11 years. The timing of the termination, executed the same day a high-profile guest had been present in the room where the final incident occurred. Patricia had seen enough employment cases to know what a careful reading of those facts could do in the right context. Celestine had listened to all of it. Then she had asked one question: how long would it take? If they settle, which I think they will, 4 to 6 weeks, and Patricia said. They settled in 3. Celestine had not wanted a large number. She had told Patricia this from the beginning, plainly and without apology. She did not want to spend months of her life in a fight over money she was not sure she deserved. She wanted enough to feel that 11 years of showing up with her whole self had been counted. She got enough, more than enough. She made one phone call after the settlement cleared. She called Tamara. She told her, in her usual plain and unhurried way, that she had paid off the remainder of Tamara's student loans, every last dollar, and that the payment had already been processed and there was no point in arguing about it. There was a silence on the line so complete that Celestine checked to make sure the call had not dropped. Then Tamara said, "Mama, you didn't have to." "I know," Celestine said. "I wanted to." Another silence. "You're going to make me cry again," Tamara said, her voice doing the thing it did, the breaking and the fierceness arriving at the same time. "Then cry," Celestine said, warm and cheerful. "You'll be perfectly fine." The 6-month anniversary party was Adrienne's idea. Small, she had said, modest. Just the team and a few of the program's students and some cake, and the acknowledgement that something real had been built in a short amount of time by people who cared about what they were doing. Celestine had agreed to it on the condition that it not be about her. It was, a little, about her, but she allowed it. The conference room held 12 people comfortably and 16 if they did not mind being close together, which they did not. There was a white sheet cake with blue letters. There were balloons that Adrienne's assistant, a young man named Tobias, had blown up with evident enthusiasm and arranged with less evident skill. There was coffee and orange juice, and a general warmth in the room that had nothing to do with the weather. 3 of the literacy program students had asked to come. The first was a quiet man named Earl, who shook Celestine's hand with both of his and could not find the words he had meant to say, and so simply nodded at her for a long moment with his eyes bright. That was enough, she nodded back. The second was a young woman named Precious, 23, who had come to the program because she was studying for her GED and needed help with the reading sections. She had passed her exam 11 days earlier. She had brought the score report in her purse and showed it to Celestine before the party started, holding it with the corners carefully away from her fingers so as not to bend it. The third was a woman named Gloria Tatum. Gloria was 61 years old. She was recently retired from 28 years working in the laundry operations of a hospital on the west side of Charlotte, a job that had been steady and honest and had asked nothing of her except persistence, which she had in deep supply. She had come to the literacy program 6 months ago on a recommendation from her neighbor, who had heard about it from someone at church, who had heard about it from someone else entirely. The quiet chain of word of mouth that moved through a community when something was worth passing on. Gloria had made progress that was not dramatic and therefore was the most durable kind. She worked carefully. She did not rush. She corrected her mistakes without embarrassment and asked questions without shame. And every Saturday she arrived with her reading materials in a clean plastic folder because she believed that what was worth doing was worth treating with respect. Near the end of the party, when the cake had been mostly eaten and the coffee was down to its last round, Gloria stood up. She stood up slowly, with the deliberate movements of a woman who was about to do something that required all of her. She reached into her purse and pulled out a folded piece of paper. She set it on the table in front of her and smoothed it very carefully with both hands, pressing each crease flat, taking her time, making sure it was right before she picked it up. The room went quiet without being asked to. She cleared her throat, and then she read. Her voice was low and she moved through the words at her own pace, not rushing and not apologizing for not rushing. She stumbled twice on longer words and went back each time and corrected herself with the steady patience of someone who had learned that going back is not failure. It is simply how you get the thing right. Her hands held the paper with a small tremor that had nothing to do with weakness and everything to do with how much the moment mattered. But she did not stop, and she read every single word. "My name is Gloria," she read, "and 6 months ago I could not read this. Now I can. That is because of a woman named Celestine who showed up every Saturday like it was the most important place in the world to be. It was. It was the most important place I had been in a long time. Thank you for showing up, Celestine. I am going to show up for someone else now. One, because that is what you do when somebody gives you something real. You do not keep it, you pass it on." She lowered the paper. The room was completely still. Then it filled, not all at once, but in a wave, the way sound fills a space when people are moved and not performing being moved, with applause. Celestine was the only person in the room who did not applaud. That was because she was using both hands to cover her face. She was not hiding. She was not embarrassed by the feeling. She had earned every bit of it, and she knew it, and she was done. On this April afternoon, 6 months into the life she had not known was coming, pretending that the feeling was smaller than it was. She just let it be what it was. Gloria folded her paper back into quarters. She put it carefully in her purse. As she sat down and looked across the table at Celestine with a small, calm, certain smile. The smile of a woman who had done the things she set out to do and knew it. Celestine lowered her hands. She looked back at Gloria. She thought about a bathroom on the 16th floor of a hotel, a towel rack, a choice made in an empty room when no one was watching. She thought about her mother's hands wringing out a mop in someone else's house and the words that had come with them. She thought about Reginald's shaking voice on the phone the evening he read his daughter a birthday card for the first time. She thought, this is what it was all for. Not the settlement, not the office with the window, not even the salary that had changed what was possible in her life. This room. Gloria's paper, smooth flat with both hands. 68 people learning to read because one woman had spent 5 years giving her Saturdays away and then been given the tools to give them better. A life built from small acts. And then, when it looked like everything was taken, the world giving it all back in a shape more generous than anything she would have thought to ask for. Celestine Mayweather took a long, steady breath. She picked up what was left of her coffee. She looked out the window at the oak trees going green in the April light, and she thought the next right thing, always the next right thing. April came to Charlotte the way it always did. Slowly, then all at once. One week the trees were bare, and the mornings were still sharp with cold. Sure, and then almost overnight, the dogwoods bloomed white along Tryon Street, and the air smelled like cut grass and possibility, and people who had been walking with their shoulders hunched against winter began to straighten up as they moved through the city, as if the season had given them permission to take up more space. Celestine noticed all of it from her window. She had a window now. 4th floor, northeast corner, the open door fund offices on Tryon Street in uptown Charlotte. She could see the crowns of 3 large oak trees and a long slice of blue Carolina sky, and, on clear days, the distant shape of the city tapering off toward the horizon. It was not a grand view. It was a real one. She preferred real. She had put 2 things on her desk in the first week and had not moved them since. On the left, the photograph of Tamara at 7 years old, standing at the edge of Lake Norman, holding a fish up with both hands like it was treasure, gap-toothed and laughing into the sun. On the right, a small wooden frame she had bought at a craft store for $4, holding an index card on which she had written in her own careful handwriting with a blue pen that she pressed deliberately into the paper. Do the next right thing. Those were the only decorations she needed. Everything else could take care of itself. The neighborhood literacy expansion had changed shape almost from the moment Celestine arrived. In her first week, she had sat in her new office with a yellow notepad and a cup of coffee and made a list of everyone she knew who was good with people, patient, tau, and had a few hours to spare on Saturday mornings. She called former teachers who had retired and were quietly going restless with the quiet. She called retired librarians whose whole lives had been built around putting the right words into the right hands. She called 2 college students who were looking for service hours and ended up staying long after the hours were fulfilled because they discovered they loved it. She called 2 women she had worked beside at the Grand Alderton for years. Donna, who had always been the first to stop her cart and help a lost guest find their floor, and Bernadette, who remembered every repeat visitor's name without being told twice. Both of them had something in them that cleaning rooms had never quite been large enough to hold. They said yes immediately. She gave Reginald Oates a volunteer position on the spot. He came every Saturday now, arriving 15 minutes early the way he always had when something mattered to him, and he worked with 2 new students who were right at the very beginning, the place he himself had stood not so long ago, scared and proud and carrying a secret too heavy to put down alone. He was the best volunteer she had, and the reason was simple. He remembered. He remembered every moment of it, the shame and the hope, and the exact feeling of a word finally clicking into place in your mind like a key in a lock you had been turning for months. He did not let anyone feel small on his side of the table. He had learned that from Celestine, and now he was teaching it forward. 6 months in, the program had grown from 4 volunteers and 11 students to 22 volunteers and 68 students spread across 3 community centers in different neighborhoods of Charlotte. Not because of any grand plan or fundraising campaign, simply because one person told another person, and that person told someone else, and word moved through a community the way word always moves when something real is happening, person to person, quietly, with trust. On the morning of Celestine's first day, back in November, Adrienne Coles had appeared in the doorway of her new office with 2 cups of coffee and a smile that suggested she had been waiting a long time for this particular person to be sitting in this particular chair. "How are you settling in?" Adrienne had asked, handing her a cup. Celestine had looked around the office. The desk, the window, the walls that were still bare, the carpet that was a sensible gray. She had felt the absence of a cart in the hallway. She had felt the unfamiliar stillness of a space that was hers to stay in, rather than to clean and leave. "I keep waiting for someone to come in and tell me to change the sheets," she said. Adrienne had laughed, a full, delighted laugh. "You don't have to change the sheets anymore." "I know," Celestine said. She had looked down at her coffee cup for a moment. "I almost miss it." She didn't. Not truly. But she said it because part of her would always hold those 11 years with care rather than bitterness. Would always believe that the work had been good and honest work, even if the ending had not been fair. Her mother had taught her that too. You can be wronged by a situation without being destroyed by it. The work was still the work. The years were still the years. Nobody could take back the floors she had polished, or the beds she had made, or the guests she had quietly and steadily looked after. Those things had happened. They were real. They belonged to her. Patricia Osei had called Celestine 3 days after the Wednesday morning sidewalk meeting, and they had talked for 45 minutes about the case. Carefully, clearly, with Patricia laying out the shape of it without pressure or promise, simply making sure Celestine understood what she was holding. The pattern in the records was what mattered. 3 documented write-ups in a single quarter. 3 acts of compassion, each one logged as a rule violation by the same supervisor. No prior incidents in 11 years. The timing of the termination, executed the same day a high-profile guest had been present in the room where the final incident occurred. Patricia had seen enough employment cases to know what a careful reading of those facts could do in the right context. Celestine had listened to all of it. Then she had asked one question. How long would it take? If they settle, which I think they will, 4 to 6 weeks, and Patricia said. They settled in 3. Celestine had not wanted a large number. She had told Patricia this from the beginning, plainly and without apology. She did not want to spend months of her life in a fight over money she was not sure she deserved. She wanted enough to feel that 11 years of showing up with her whole self had been counted. She got enough. More than enough. She made one phone call after the settlement cleared. She called Tamara. She told her, in her usual plain and unhurried way, that she had paid off the remainder of Tamara's student loans, every last dollar, and that the payment had already been processed, and there was no point in arguing about it. There was a silence on the line so complete that Celestine checked to make sure the call had not dropped. Then Tamara said, "Mama, you didn't have to." "I know," Celestine said. "I wanted to." Another silence. "You're going to make me cry again," Tamara said, her voice doing the thing it did, the breaking and the fierceness arriving at the same time. "Then cry," Celestine said, warm and cheerful. "Yes, you'll be perfectly fine." The 6-month anniversary party was Adrienne's idea. Small, she had said, modest, just the team and a few of the program's students and some cake, and the acknowledgement that something real had been built in a short amount of time by people who cared about what they were doing. Celestine had agreed to it on the condition that it not be about her. It was, a little, about her. But she allowed it. The conference room held 12 people comfortably, and 16 if they did not mind being close together, which they did not. There was a white sheet cake with blue letters. There were balloons that Adrienne's assistant, a young man named Tobias, had blown up with evident enthusiasm and arranged with less evident skill. And there was coffee and orange juice, and a general warmth in the room that had nothing to do with the weather. 3 of the literacy program students had asked to come. The first was a quiet man named Earl, who shook Celestine's hand with both of his and could not find the words he had meant to say, and so simply nodded at her for a long moment with his eyes bright. That was enough. She nodded back. The second was a young woman named Precious, 23, who had come to the program because she was studying for her GED and needed help with the reading sections. She had passed her exam 11 days earlier. She had brought the score report in her purse and showed it to Celestine before the party started, holding it with the corners carefully away from her fingers so as not to bend it. The third was a woman named Gloria Tatum. Gloria was 61 years old. She was recently retired from 28 years working in the laundry operations of a hospital on the west side of Charlotte. A job that had been steady and honest, and had asked nothing of her except persistence, which she had in deep supply. She had come to the literacy program 6 months ago on a recommendation from her neighbor, who had heard about it from someone at church, who had heard about it from someone else entirely. The quiet chain of word of mouth that moved through a community when something was worth passing on. Gloria had made progress that was not dramatic and therefore was the most durable kind. She worked carefully. She did not rush. She corrected her mistakes without embarrassment and asked questions without shame. And every Saturday she arrived with her reading materials in a clean plastic folder because she believed that what was worth doing was worth treating with respect. Near the end of the party, when the cake had been mostly eaten and the coffee was down to its last round, Gloria stood up. She stood up slowly, with the deliberate movements of a woman who was about to do something that required all of her. She reached into her purse and pulled out a folded piece of paper. She set it on the table in front of her and smoothed it very carefully with both hands, pressing each crease flat, taking her time, making sure it was right before she picked it up. The room went quiet without being asked to. She cleared her throat, and then she read. Her voice was low and she moved through the words at her own pace. Ace not rushing and not apologizing for not rushing. She stumbled twice on longer words and went back each time and corrected herself with the steady patience of someone who had learned that going back is not failure. It is simply how you get the thing right. Her hands held the paper with a small tremor that had nothing to do with weakness and everything to do with how much the moment mattered. But she did not stop, and she read every single word. My name is Gloria, she read, and 6 months ago I could not read this. Now I can. That is because of a woman named Celestine who showed up every Saturday like it was the most important place in the world to be. It was. It was the most important place I had been in a long time. Thank you for showing up, Celestine. I am going to show up for someone else now. Because that is what you do when somebody gives you something real. You do not keep it. You pass it on. She lowered the paper. The room was completely still. Then it filled. Not all at once, but in a wave. The way sound fills a space when people are moved and not performing being moved. With applause. Celestine was the only person in the room who did not applaud. That was because she was using both hands to cover her face. She was not hiding. She was not embarrassed by the feeling. She had earned every bit of it, and she knew it, and she was done. On this April afternoon, 6 months into the life she had not known was coming, pretending that the feeling was smaller than it was. She just let it be what it was. Gloria folded her paper back into quarters. She put it carefully in her purse. She sat down and looked across the table at Celestine with a small, calm, certain smile. The smile of a woman who had done the thing she set out to do and knew it. Celestine lowered her hands. She looked back at Gloria. She thought about a bathroom on the 16th floor of a hotel, a towel rack, a choice made in an empty room when no one was watching. She thought about her mother's hands wringing out a mop in someone else's house and the words that had come with them. She thought about Reginald's shaking voice on the phone the evening he read his daughter a birthday card for the first time. She thought, this is what it was all for. Not the settlement, not the office with the window, not even the salary that had changed what was possible in her life. This room. Gloria's paper, smoothed flat with both hands. 68 people learning to read because one woman had spent 5 years giving her Saturdays away and then been given the tools to give them better. A life built from small acts. And then, when it looked like everything was taken, the world giving it all back in a shape more generous than anything she would have thought to ask for. Celestine Mayweather took a long, steady breath. She picked up what was left of her coffee. She looked out the window at the oak trees going green in the April light, and she thought the next right thing. Always the next right thing. 3 weeks after the anniversary party on a Friday evening, when the office had gone quiet and her co-workers had said their goodbyes, and the building had settled into the particular hush it held after 5 o'clock. When Celestine sat at her desk and did something she had not done in years. She wrote a letter, not an email, not a text. A real letter on real paper with a real pen. The kind her mother had always said was the only honest way to say something that truly mattered, because it required you to slow down and mean every word. She did not know, as she uncapped the pen and pulled a fresh sheet of paper toward her, whether she would ever send it. She only knew that the thing inside her that needed saying had been sitting quietly in her chest for 6 months, and that the party and glorious folded paper and the 68 people now learning to read in rooms across Charlotte had finally made it too full to hold any longer. She pressed the pen to the paper. She began. Dear Mr. Jordan, I am not a woman who writes letters easily. I have always been better at doing things than at talking about them. But my mother taught me that some things are important enough to be put into words, even when the words feel smaller than what they are trying to carry. I want you to know where things stand. I have a job I love. I have an office with a window that looks out over the oak trees on Tryon Street, and I sit at my desk every morning, and I am grateful for it in a way that has not faded with time the way some gratitudes do. I have 68 people learning to read in a program I built from the ground up, and 22 volunteers who give their Saturday mornings because they believe in something real. I have a daughter in Atlanta whose student loans are paid in full. I have a lawyer who looked at 11 years of honest work and made sure they were counted. Suddy, I have all of this because you noticed a towel. Not just because you noticed, because you cared about what the noticing meant. That is a different thing, Mr. Jordan. Many people notice things and keep walking. Very few people stop and ask themselves what the right thing to do about it is, and then do that right thing before morning. You did. I want you to know something else. I have thought about it many times since October, standing in various rooms of the life I now have, and I am certain of this. I would do it again. If I could go back to that Tuesday morning and stand in the bathroom of room 1 in 612 and know all of it, the clipboard, the parking garage, the notebook with the numbers that did not add up, weigh the long and frightening uncertainty of not knowing what was coming, I would still reach into my cart and put that third towel on the rack, because it was the right thing to do. My mother used to say that kindness is never wasted, even when it costs you. She said it when I was young enough that I understood it as a lesson. I am old enough now to understand it as a truth. I believe it more completely than I have ever believed anything. You changed my life. I want to be plain about that. Not with money and not with a job offer, though both of those things were more generous than I had words for on that sidewalk. You changed my life with the decision to look at what happened and say, that is not right, and I am going to do something about it. That kind of strength, the quiet kind, in the kind that acts without an audience, is the kind I have spent my whole life trying to practice. It meant a great deal to see it in someone else. I hope you are well. I hope that when you stay in hotels, whichever ones, on whichever floors, the people who take care of your rooms know that you see them. Not just the room, them. I believe that you do. Yours with gratitude, Celestine Mayweather Program, Coordinator, Neighborhood Literacy Expansion. The Open Door Fund, Charlotte, North Carolina. She read it through once when she finished. Then she folded it into thirds, crisp and even, the way she folded everything, with her whole attention on getting it right. She slid it into an envelope. She wrote her return address in the top left corner, neat and unhurried. On the front, she wrote the address for the Jordan brand offices in Charlotte, and below the address, she wrote a small note asking that it please be forwarded if possible. She sealed it. She set it beside her keys. She mailed it the following Monday morning on her way into the office, dropping it into the blue postal box on the corner of Tryon and 6th without slowing her pace more than a moment. She did not stand there watching the box after it went in. It was done. It was out in the world. What happened to it next was not something she needed to manage. She did not expect a response. She had written the letter for herself as much as for him, to say the thing properly, out loud on paper, because her mother had taught her that some things deserved to be said that way. And because she was 53 years old and had learned that the people who had done right by you deserved to know it, even if the knowing arrived in a small blue envelope through a postal box on a Monday morning. Sometimes a thing needed to exist in the world whether or not anyone received it. Sometimes the writing was entirely enough. 3 weeks later, she came back from her lunch break on a Tuesday, a sandwich from the place on Trade Street that she had found in her second week and had been loyal to ever since, to find a small, neatly wrapped package sitting on the center of her desk. No note on the outside, just her name, written in handwriting she did not recognize, which meant it had been delivered rather than mailed. Someone had brought it to the front desk and the receptionist, a young woman named Kezia, had placed it on her desk while she was out. Celestine set down her bag. She looked at the package for a moment, then she unwrapped it. Inside, folded in white tissue paper, was a pair of sneakers. Air Jordans, deep blue and gold, her exact size. She turned them over in her hands slowly, studying them with the careful attention she gave to anything worth examining. Beneath the tissue paper, in the bottom of the box, was a note. Small, folded once, written in the same hand as the address on the outside. She picked it up and unfolded it. She read it once. She read it a second time. Then she folded it in half along its original crease and slid it carefully into the chest pocket of her blazer, right over her heart. She wore it there for the rest of the day. Through her 2 afternoon meetings and the phone call with a volunteer coordinator at the second community center and the end-of-day paperwork that always piled up on Tuesdays. Through all of it, the folded note rested in her pocket, small and certain, like a hand placed quietly on a shoulder. The note said, in 3 short lines, the next right thing, every time. MJ. 1 year to the day after she was fired, Celestine did something she had not planned and could not entirely explain. She framed a towel. She had thought about it for weeks before she did it, not obsessively, just the way a good idea sits at the edge of your mind and waits patiently for you to catch up to it. She had finally called the laundry supplier, whose name she remembered from the Grand Alderton supply invoices, a company based in Gastonia that she had seen on the backs of detergent bottles in the storage closet 100 times over 11 years. They still supplied the hotel. They sold directly. She placed an order for a single bath towel, white, thick, 400 thread count, the exact weight and weave of the ones she had folded and hung and tucked into trifolds in every room on the 16th floor. When it arrived in a plastic sleeve, she opened it carefully, the way you open something that is going to be permanent. She folded it herself, with the same precise trifold she had used 10,000 times. The corners tucked in clean, the center panel sitting exactly right. The way Ida Mae Mayweather had taught her that anything worth doing was worth doing with your hands paying full attention. She bought a simple white frame from the craft store, wide enough for the towel to sit inside it without crowding. She mounted the folded towel on a backing of pale gray matting. She had the frame sealed under glass. She hung it on the wall of her office just to the right of her desk, directly beneath the $4 wooden frame that held the index card in her own handwriting. Do the next right thing. It looked, to anyone who did not know the story, like the strangest possible piece of office decor. A framed towel, white, folded, sealed behind glass. To everyone who asked about it, and everyone always asked, it became the most important thing in the room. Mayroom. She told the story the same way every time. She started with the alarm. 4:47 in the morning, the cold floor, the coffee on a timer, the dark blue pants and the stitch patch on the chest. She told it plainly and without drama, the way her mother had taught her to tell hard things. Not to perform them, but to let the weight of them speak for itself. She told them about room 1612, the empty bathroom, the one clean towel left behind the rack, the checkout note that said the guest was coming back tired after a long afternoon, the decision made alone in a quiet room when no one was watching. She told them about Gerald Pruitt and his clipboard, about the 3 violations, a note, a blanket, a towel, lined up like evidence against a woman who had spent 11 years doing her job with her whole heart, about the walk to the break room, the locker, the photo of Tamara peeled gently off the metal door. She told them about the parking garage. She did not rush past this part. She let people sit with it. The exhaust smell, the dim concrete, the long shaking breath, the quiet crying that comes when a person has been strong for too long. She told it because she believed that the hard parts of a story mattered as much as the good parts. Maybe more. The hard parts were where the truth lived. Then she told them about the knock at the door. Marcus in his charcoal button-down. The tall man on the sidewalk in the gray sweatshirt who had looked up at her with an expression she had not expected. The apology. The envelope. The 3 pages and what they said and what Tamara sounded like on the phone when she heard the number. And then she always ended the same way. She had not written it down or practiced it. It was just the thing she believed, and it came out the same words every time, because true things tend to do that. I lost my job for doing the right thing. And then the right thing came back for me. I don't tell you this because I think life is always fair. It is often not fair, and I will not stand here and tell you otherwise. I tell you this because the towel was never about Michael Jordan. The towel was about a decision I made in a bathroom on the 16th floor of a hotel when nobody was there to see it and nobody was going to give me credit for it either way. Do what is right when no one is watching. That is the only version of yourself you get to keep. Everything else can be taken. That cannot. She told it to her volunteers, Aaron to her students, and to Adrian's board of directors at the spring presentation, and to Tamara on Sunday evenings when their hour-long calls drifted, the way they often did, toward the question of what life was for. She told it to Mr. Beaumont. He had come down one October evening, almost exactly a year after that first October, the leaves again going gold outside the building, and knocked on her door for the first time since she had lived beneath him. She opened it to find a small, thin man in his 80s in a cardigan, the color of old moss, holding nothing, looking at her with the careful eyes of someone who had been working up to something for a while. "I heard you cry," he said, "last year, in your car in the parking lot. I was at my window." He paused. His voice was deliberate, the voice of a man who had learned not to waste words. "I worried about you. I didn't know what to do about it. I'm sorry I didn't knock sooner." Celestine looked at him for a long moment. "I'm okay," she said. "I'm better than okay." He looked past her at the apartment, the travel mug, the photo of Tamara above the sink, the kitchen that smelled like coffee on a timer. He took it all in with quiet, unhurried attention. "You seem like a good person," he said. She smiled. "I try to be." He nodded twice, slow, certain nods. "Good enough," he said. She recognized those words immediately. Dorothy had said them to her 5 years ago in the doorway of a community center on a gray Saturday morning in November, with both hands wrapped around Celestine's hand. And Celestine had felt at the time that she was in exactly the right place. She felt it again now. The world was so much smaller than it looked. The kindness you put into it came back in shapes you never would have chosen for yourself, and that turned out to be exactly right. On the 1-year anniversary of her first day at the Open Door Fund, Celestine arrived at the office before anyone else. She made coffee in the break room. She carried her mug, the dented silver one Tamara had given her, the lid still not quite sealing right, still not replaced, back to her desk and sat in the early morning quiet of a room she had come to love the way you love a place that has watched you become more fully yourself inside it. She opened her notebook. She wrote slowly, pressing the pen with intention. Year 1. Out of 68 students across 3 centers, 22 volunteers who give their Saturday mornings without being asked twice, 2 mothers who can now help their children with homework without having to hide that they couldn't before. 1 man named Earl who read his wife a love letter written in his own hand for the first time in 40 years of marriage. 1 woman named Gloria who stood up in a conference room with a folded piece of paper and read every word of what she had written herself. 1 framed towel on the wall, 1 extra towel that started all of it. She put the pen down. She looked at the towel in its white frame, white and folded and still, sealed behind glass, holding in its simple shape the whole long chain of things. The bathroom, the choice, the parking garage, the knock at the door, the envelope, the sidewalk, on the laugh, the letter, the note in the chest pocket, the Saturday mornings stretching forward into a future she was only beginning to see the edges of. She looked at the index card beneath it. Do the next right thing. She thought about her mother wringing out a mop in someone else's house with her whole name pressed into the work. She thought about Tamara at 7, holding a fish up in the summer sunlight, laughing with her whole body. She thought about Reginald arriving 15 minutes early every Saturday because the work mattered. She thought about Gloria's hands smoothing a folded piece of paper flat before she stood up to read it. She thought about a bathroom on the 16th floor of a hotel, a towel rack, a single decision made alone, in quiet, when no one was watching and no one would ever need to know. In Hanan she understood, not as a new thought, but as a thing that had been living in her bones long enough to have become simply true, that the finest moments of her life had never come from what the world handed her. They had come from what she gave first, freely, quietly, without asking what would come back. The extra towel had cost her a job, and in return, slowly, imperfectly, through the strange and winding and generous logic of a world that is not always fair, but is sometimes, when you least expect it, exactly right. It had given her a life. She picked up her coffee. She turned to face the window. The oak trees on Tryon Street were going gold at their edges in the October morning light, the same way they had been going gold a year ago when everything changed. Pointed, the sky above them was wide and pale and full of the particular possibility that belongs only to early mornings, before the day has decided what it is going to be. Celestine Mayweather sat in her office with her window and her towel and her index card and her coffee that was still warm, and she looked out at the morning, and she was ready. Whatever came next, she would do the right thing. She always had, she always would. And that is the story of Celestine Mayweather, a woman who gave a tired man an extra towel, a woman who lost everything for doing the right thing, and a woman who woke up the very next morning to find that the world had been paying attention all along. If this story moved you even a little, if it reminded you that small acts of kindness are never wasted, or even when they cost you, then do one small kind thing right now. Hit that like button. It takes 1 second. It costs you nothing, and it helps this story reach someone out there who might really need to hear it today. If you believe that doing the right thing matters, even when no one is watching, subscribe to this channel. Every story we tell is about exactly that. Real people, real kindness, real moments that remind us what we are all capable of when we choose to show up for each other. And before you go, drop a comment below and tell us where you are watching from. We have people tuning in from all over the world, and we love seeing every single location. It reminds us that kindness speaks every language and lives in every corner of this earth. Now go click on the video appearing on your screen right now. Now trust us, you are going to want to watch that one next. We will see you there.